happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Um, so I'm going to try and speed through what I'm trying to say. I have a presentation up. So basically, I volunteered for about 2 years. Well, not fully 2 years, less than 2 years, about a year and a half with Mr. Alf Kumalo at his museum. I basically just come back from doing my master's in museum studies. Um, with my focus in my master's program was around photography and looking at how atrocity photographs are displayed in museums as artworks, in a sense. So there was this up and coming exhibition that was being planned on the rise and fall of apartheid, etc. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life in coming back, but I had a particular interest in photography, and I went off and visited the Alf Kumalo Museum in Soweto, in Diepkloof. And basically, in my engagement with him, I ended up staying for just about 2 years working with him. So I want to share a little bit of my experience with such a great photographer. So I'm going to have to indicate to you, right? Okay. So I'm sure it's a photographer that doesn't really need any major introductions, and his work really spans over 60 years of photography, capturing so many aspects of South Africa, not just, I can't just say capturing apartheid. It was the political issues that existed at the time, the fight against apartheid, but also looking deeper into his work. There was far more than just capturing those moments in South Africa. So this is Alf. This is one of the pictures that we found in our going through and trying to work through his collection. Has anybody been to the Alf Kumalo Museum here? Just by show of hands. Okay. I think sadly now, I'm not really sure, but I think it's closed still. When he passed away in October 2012. So I'm just wondering if we can everybody see the image on the projector? Is it? Okay. So basically, what I want to share is in relation to Alf, being a documentary photographer, he obviously had a massive collection. He had worked for several places, the Star newspaper being one of them, the Drum magazine, etc. And really, the majority of his work being in a time of the analog, right? So there were no digital cameras in his time. So, and this is just one image of a space that was in his museum where, you know, you would kind of come in there and there would be like various objects about, you know, photographic equipment, plus, you know, black and white prints stuck on each other, and there'd be like a box of negatives and so forth. So it wasn't really a completely fully organized space in that sense. But I think if you take into account the fact, if you match what I'm saying against the context, then you would understand why the archive becomes such a fragile space for photographers that worked during the time of apartheid. So, for one, as I said, you know, 61 years of documentary work. You can imagine how much photographs that is, right? I kind of estimated about 500,000 images in his time. And just the kind of work that he covered, you know, from the Sharpeville Massacre, 1976, uprisings to Samora Machel, and then he was a really big boxing fan, and he followed Muhammad Ali, and so he was in Zaire, and he has many portraits with Ali, and he was a huge fan, and just the everydayness. He has a picture of a young girl carrying a puppy as a baby on the back, Mandela's dog like resting at the gates, various moments that he's captured. Um, and then when we look at the work and the collection, we can see that, you can go to the next slide, you can see that a lot of his work is really in a very fragile state. One, that he faced a lot of police harassment as a photographer. There was no real safe space and safekeeping of images. So when we imagine a fancy archival room with room temperature and acid-free paper, that just didn't exist for photographers in that particular time. And given the kind of intensity of the work, and so, and then there's other things that that he faced, and one of the things that I understood about Alf is that he wanted to be the owner of his work, and I'm sure that maybe for freelance journalists, photojournalists, they can talk about what that complexity is about, that suddenly drum owns you and drum owns your work and your copyright. And so he really fought hard and long against those issues, and there are some legal papers in that regard that we need to acknowledge, that he fought for his right to own his work, and he actually went and got it out of the Star newspaper. But on the other hand, he also had a very stubborn personality, and he was a very determined person, and he wanted, and I think rightfully so, convert the house that he lived in Soweto, and convert that into a space that he envisioned as a space where he would train and did train young photographers, a space where he could show his work, and he was present there every single day. But of course, there was also a flood in the home, so there's water damage on the work, etc. So the entire archive, on many levels, there were serious threats that were posed to the archive. And these are just some of the pictures that I could find of some of his collection. You can go through them. And as you know, these are just significant, precious images. I kind of wonder about this picture, because it's like such an intimate moment of Winnie in the kitchen, right? And there's beautiful pictures of him just kind of spending time with Winnie. So, and then, we can just carry on. And so, just thinking about like the evidence of the work that he produced, and we can stop at this. And so, basically, in the time that I was there, and with the experience of studying this degree that I got on museum studies, was really taking it and thinking about what can I do in a space like this that is so needed. And when you think about the life of someone like Ernest Cole, who faced such grave vulnerabilities, even to the point of being homeless, living on a subway in New York, and that his work is not even owned within South Africa. And here we have a living photographer who is still alive, but there is no commitment by the state and by anybody, not even the National Arts Council, to come forward and to say to Alf, we want to invest in what you're doing, and we believe in this history. And so there was, often I would find him going to influential places and trying to sell parts of his work and photographs to people. in order to sustain his life even at the age of 82. And for me, it's just a grave issue of some of the grossest violations of this government, that someone who put his life on the line, who documented every single intimacy of the ANC and the liberation movement, has even suffered to his death and leaving his work at such vulnerable stages. What we did as a group of curators and artists under the Center for Historical Reenactments, which was founded by Gabi Mobo, myself and Kimang, Lehulere, Donna Kukama, and Dineo Bapape did a weekend curatorial workshop where we started working through his archive. And for example, this is just a whiteboard that you do with workshops, and we started finding all these various portraits of people. There's no label to them, and he would just walk into that room and go, "Oh my goodness, this is Sibongile Kumalo at the bottom, left," and he would run through all these pictures like they were yesterday in his memory and so completely fresh. And I felt that there was a complete loss of an oral history linked to these photos and his own archival voice to these images, and that it was really a missed opportunity in South Africa. And so we really went through several of the pictures. You can just scroll through them. And some of these pictures, this is the president of Botswana, I think in the 70s, but like also finding these very poetic images that I thought were pretty like non-documentary. They were documentary but also non, and there's another one that follows that, the way he also shot in colorful, and so, and you can go through it. And then thinking about, so the questions that we kind of had in the weekend that we were there was thinking about how historic, how history is iconic, right? And why is it iconic and why does it become iconic? And then as artists and curators in this current time, like even in 2016, how do we work with evidence-based work? Like when we see these pictures, do we only see them in their history, or can we see them also in our present? And how do we look at these pictures in our present time? And so kind of really looking at, like, do we just also look at things kind of logically? Oh, this is a period, so photographs belong in 1976 and 1986 and 1996. Is there some logic to these images, or is it really like an assimilation of so many different events, and including the life of the photographer? So how do we begin to shape our own ideas and thinking about the archive of these images? And so the next slide, and this one, is also just showing the kind of things that we found that were just like so precious, so incredible, and like nothing. And that's the thing with the archive, is like, if you leave that power of the archive to the archivist, that person will determine what's to be thrown away and what's to be kept. And that's really dangerous, And so in the life of Alf, he kept everything. He has letters from girlfriends, there's like tons of different things, so many different things, but so many essential things that spoke to his life, but he kept every single thing. And also, like, how telling is this image, that we found of a photograph that he took about, a headline, if you look like Idi Amin, you will love Nelson Mandela, and just, this is like a moment of apartheid where Mandela himself was portrayed as this evil being, and now we are at the time where there's a different relationship to him. And so like apartheid narrative to democracy narratives, and so forth. And just thinking about my questions to the group was just thinking about the future of the archive, and how do we look at it? And there's this quote about objects are to be seen as stimulants for transformation of the idea of the sculpture. And so, like, do we see all these photographs that are stacked on each other and glued on top of each other, and negatives that are kind of half washed out? How do we kind of utilize and use and reinterpret this very work? And then the next slide is just looking at how do we understand the nature of the problem. So on the one hand, there's a real threat to the photographers who worked in the analog period. Some very simple, basic, essential threats to the archive around things that you do need to know about the life of a negative, storing negatives in acid paper, how it will destroy it, the deterioration of images, etc. So all of these kind of essential skills and knowledge is important, and how does that link to preserving the archive? And so this is kind of Gabi and how we had to work through it. And I mean, it was really kind of, for me, this is not so much talking about a photographer that was chaotic. It's talking about a photographer that held so much knowledge and so much work with so absolutely zero support, and that he had to self-fund just about everything that was happening. And his level of issues of trust made sense. Like, even meeting me and wondering, why does this person want to come and volunteer here? Do you want to come and exploit my situation, etc. He has been so familiar with people being exploitative about his work. And so I think that fragility of the archive and the preservation required a completely another intervention in terms of how to support him. And sadly, when he passed away in 2012, the family intervened, and of course the family intervened in the worst way possible. They changed the locks of the museum. Nobody could gain access to the museum. This led to young criminals breaking into the museum and actually living inside the museum. All the electronic equipment was stolen, the iMac machines, the external drives, everything that we had digitized had been stolen. And the negatives, of course, were there and so forth, and are unthinkable. And in ways that just destroys what he had built. And up to now, that estate, I think, is still with the lawyers. There have been many interested parties wanting to get their hands on that collection, including the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And so when Alf died, there was this great memorial service in the city. And Winnie Mandela stood up and said, "We are going to declare this archive a heritage of South Africa, and we are going to protect it, and we are going to put money into it." And up to now, nothing has been done. There's been no follow-through on any of these commitments. And it has just become a situation of families saying, "You stay out of it, we need to deal with this." And of course, the question to photographers here is really, how do you deal with that in your own life when you pass on? What's going to happen to your collection? How are you going to make sure that becomes a heritage of the country and it becomes part of our global knowledge? Thanks.